Hey y'all, it's me Sydney and welcome back to Planet Sid. So today we are going to be talking about Succession and why we blindly support bad people in real life and on the screen. And then also we're going to be talking about if money enhances you or if it changes you. So if you guys are interested in that, then stay tuned. So if you don't know, Succession is a really popular TV show. It aired on HBO and it just concluded its fourth season and final season this past year. And along the show's journey and recently, they've been winning all types of awards. But if you haven't heard about it, you should most definitely check it out. It's been a while since I've really seen a TV show that I have been anticipating every week. Like I literally used to wait until 8 p.m. on the dot for the Succession episode to load for the week. So if you guys haven't watched it, you most definitely should. It's a really good. But anyway, Succession is a drama / dark comedy show. And it basically focuses on Logan Roy, who is played by Brian Cox. And he is the CEO of this huge media empire. And the main children and also the main characters as well are Kendall, Roman, and Shiv. And basically they all fight and claw for their father's approval in order to become the next successor. That's basically the core of the show. And over the course of the 4 seasons, we watch each sibling come close to being CEO, but inevitably fail because their father never really honestly prepared them for it. He kind of dangled his approval or the promise of power over them like a carrot, but they never actually got to bite into it. So along the show, we see each sibling, with the exception of Connor, become morally corrupt throughout the show. And they constantly abuse one another and others, their spouses, or anyone they feel is below them on the totem pole. And the audience also gets to see how broken and deprived of love each of the 4 siblings are, which is really sad. And that was kind of like a core of it as well. And their father, Logan Roy, is very cold and abusive towards them in a lot of different ways. So I want to explore why we blindly support terrible people and characters, and also if money enhances people. I think that the show explored a lot of interesting topics, especially considering the political climate that we're in right now. And so the first thing I want to get into is the internet's response to Succession, and more so like the analysis and like the baby girlification of the main characters. And in general, like Succession kind of became its own phenomenon, whether it was everybody having their own favorite sibling or just quoting different lines because the writing was so good on the show, or I don't even know what to call it, the phenomenon of quiet luxury. Like that kind of took over TikTok for a while. So if you don't know, Succession did take a while to catch on. I personally did not get into Succession until early 2022. And as soon as I saw it, I was instantly hooked. And the show has always been critically acclaimed, but it didn't seem to get widespread attention until the later seasons. It kind of had an organic growth. And along with that new attention, Succession had gained a cult following on social media, with people chiming in to defend their favorite billionaires. And this can range from the obsession with quiet luxury or our love for the quote-unquote disgusting brothers, the Shiv army, the Roman and Jerry thing, I don't even know what to call that, the con heads, or the baby girlification of Kendall Roy, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of different subsets within the Succession fandom. And the fans were very much invested in wanting their favorite billionaire sibling to win and to have more power and money. And I find that so interesting. And I find this interesting because if anything, the viewers who watch Succession, including me, will be enraged and triggered by watching the show, you would think. And we wouldn't feel compelled to root for anyone because of how accurately Succession critiques American politics and capitalism. And the Roys, or just about anyone who comes across the screen while Succession is airing, is without a doubt a terrible person, and the writers allow the audience to see this time and time again. But we also get to see the different family dynamics that play out, in addition to the enormous amount of wealth and power within the family. And so to some degree, everybody can relate to that. Like if you come from a toxic family or if you just observed one, it's a lot of that in the show as well, because the Roys are really messed up. And I think as an audience, we can relate to the characters to some degree, but we can also detach and sit back and watch the Roys as if we're watching a circus of some sort. because we won't ever have that kind of wealth. So it is kind of weird watching it. And another thing that stood out to me in Succession was the Roys are running this media empire called ATN, which is a kind of like Fox News in the real world. And it's that super niche but realistic insight into the world of business and media. And it also drives this paradox of loathing the Roys, but also being so fascinated by them. Because again, we get to see time and time again that they are awful, awful people. And I say that this is an interesting paradox because every working class American deals with the consequences of billionaires' greed every day. And any editor in any news publication has or knows someone who has been told that they have 15 minutes to get their stuff or gotten fired via Zoom, which also happened in the show as well. So it's puzzling for these viewers, including me, to be so invested in the lives of these characters as they engage in their brutal and sometimes barbaric fight for more wealth and power. And I feel that everybody kind of had their wake-up moment while watching this series after the 8th episode of the final season when the election took place. And we had to watch Kendall and Roman help get a fascist elected as president because simply it would be good for business. No other reason. And this episode was a little too on the nose for me, and I'm sure everybody else who watched it as well. And it really gave me flashbacks to 2020, and now we're in 2024 again, and the election is coming up at the end of the year, and we'll just see how that plays out. And I'm not exempt from this fan behavior either. Like me personally, I was rooting for Shiv the entire time and hoping that somehow, some way she would triumph. Because she had a rough time during the final season. Like, I just wanted her to just take one win because she kept on taking L's left and right. Poor Shiv. I mean, well, not poor Shiv, but poor Shiv. But she's a terrible person too. But I'll explore my conflicting feelings for Shiv and why I felt compelled to root for her later on in this video. But even though fans had their favorite Roy sibling for whatever reason, there was such an interesting response to Roman and Kendall Roy specifically, and I wonder why. There was very much an quote-unquote I can save him attitude that was a recurring theme for these Succession fans, which resulted in the baby girlification memes, which I'm sure you've seen, specifically for Kendall and sometimes for Roman, but Roman and Jerry were just like their own thing, like the mommy issues, like that was a whole different thing. And I think that the internet had this response partially because Kendall Roy is a sad, sad boy. He is a depressed man who acts like a boy. And some may feel the need to protect him due to the audience getting to see his father's abuse up close and firsthand. And the same could be said for Roman Roy as well. But how they deal with their father's abuse and how they process that manifests so differently. And it's so interesting because they're both males, but it's so starkly different. And that influences which sibling fans of the show gravitate towards and feel justified in defending. Even though these are fictional billionaires who literally wouldn't care about us unless it were a means to an end if we were in the show. And it made me wonder, why do we blindly support these terrible people? Because we do this in real life and in fictional as well. And so I saw in an article with GQ that the editor Kate Lindsay writes that, quote, "The blind devotion some viewers seem to have to these characters is also as troubling. One of the reasons the Succession characters, as villainous as they are, have people genuinely rooting for them is because they're not caricatures of evil. Like real people, they have sympathetic moments. And viewers are privy to, perhaps even understand, what drives them to do the genuinely awful things that they do. But this character building has fostered a sense of protectiveness so fierce that some fans seem to have forgotten that they are watching a TV show, and act as if these are real people being unfairly targeted by the writers. In a series about power and corruption and how they ruin people's lives, you can't expect every episode to be karaoke nights and bachelor trips to Prague. At this point, it is obvious that Succession isn't really about who will or will not be enshrined as CEO of Raystar Royco, but rather the damaged people in the systems behind the veil of American power. There won't be some reveal that proves the secret goodness of these characters, nor will perfect justice be served to the bad ones, because that's the point the show is trying to make. In that sense, they are very real indeed." End quote. And I think that this is such an interesting perspective because this article was specifically about the internet's overwhelming and sometimes strange support for the Roy siblings as if they were real, decent people. And now let's sum up social media's response to Succession as a combination of stan culture paired with just about every viewer being negatively affected by capitalism and greed to some degree, but not being able to fully internalize that the people they support are the oppressors, fictional or not. And furthermore, there have been multiple instances throughout the series where we see how corrupt the Roys truly are, but it doesn't stop the audience at all, including me, from wanting to root for them, whoever your favorite character is, of course. And to some degree, this is understandable because the writing is excellent across the board. Like Succession writers, whatever they're going to pay, they need a raise in general. But the writing was excellent, and these are fictional characters, and the audience also sees how damaged the Roy siblings are due to their father's abuse. And I personally think it's easier to become corrupt from the inside out if that's the only world that you know. However, even though I have some sympathy for the Roys, even Logan Roy and his children as well, they are still without a doubt terrible, awful people who would have pistoled me if I was on fire, especially if it meant getting even a sliver of Logan's approval. And this is so mind-boggling because we see the Roy siblings and everyone else around them become even more terrible people over the course of the series, but their fan bases have only strengthened over this time. And this is what reminds me of stan culture in real life as well, because we see celebrities who kind of go on somewhat of a descent of madness or just end up being shitty people, but their fans, like their loyal fans, if anything, they become even more emboldened. And because there have been multiple instances where a famous person is exposed for being a terrible person or just becomes so enamored with greed and power that they become corrupt, but if anything, their fans go harder for them and they gain new support from different groups. We see this a lot, honestly. Or we see somebody famous who will become very problematic over time and people become outraged one day but then are praising them the next. Doja Cat, I'm looking at you. And this isn't all the time, but it happens way too often. And whether it's watching your favorite artist become a terrible person is still choosing to support them no matter what, or congratulating them from acquiring $1 billion. And I feel that this can be attributed to the general public being so desensitized to corruption, so much to the point that it has become a social norm that we just accept. And I also think that some may support or aspire to be amongst terrible people with unimaginable wealth and power because they know that if the roles were reversed, they would behave the same way. And you can see this with Tom and Greg's transformations by the end of the show, which could be attributed to a number of things. But at the beginning of the series, they were considered to be outsiders compared to the Roys. But they had risen up in the ranks and had become undoubtedly terrible people as well. But there is this allure of lawlessness. And some people do find joy in treating other humans as second-class citizens. Not me though, but some people do. And whether that be through violence or using someone as a footstool like they do in Succession. But even if you aren't being an outright terrible person, is there such thing as being a good, decent person if you have that much wealth and power? Unless you're redistributing it or somehow making the world a better place, I personally don't think so. And I say this because everyone in Succession is corrupt from the inside out, some more than others, but there is no such thing as being a good person in that world because their existence is causing the direct oppression of millions of people, and they could care less because all they want is more power. And this applies to everyone, not just Roman, Kendall, and Shiv. This also applies to Connor, Jerry, Stewie, and everyone else. And I say this because we see time and time again how little everyone truly cares about people if it isn't serving their best interests in the show. However, one could argue that to exist in the fictitious world of Succession, you have to be transactional and greedy because everybody else is being like that. And it seems like that world demands that you be cutthroat and dishonest in order to sustain yourself, because if you're the only one playing by the rules, you're good. It's a thunderstorm. If you're the only one playing by the rules and everybody else isn't, then you're going to get fucked over in the end. It reminds me of like this sentiment that a lot of people express when talking about wealth, and they say that they hope, but they can't guarantee if they had X amount of money that they will be a better person when discussing the ultra rich. And I think that that's valid because we see time and time again of people who are like phoenix rising from the ashes just to end up emulating the people that they once despised. And it happens all the time, and I'm sure it will continue to happen. But I think what draws people into Succession, besides the phenomenal acting and writing, is the fact that we get to see these people with unimaginable wealth and power play and behave simply as if they were playing a game. But it can get so dark and barbaric all in the name of power, whilst not actually having to deal with the consequences of their actions, which are very, very real. And while on the other side of the screen, there's us, the viewers who are watching this, and the audience who is probably 9 times out of 10, maybe even upper, but probably middle or lower class. And we would honestly hate the Roys if they were real people, much how we dislike the Trumps or the Murdochs. And I guess also, since this is a show in Hollywood, desirability and the halo effect help soften the blow too, because these are quote unquote conventionally attractive Hollywood actors and not real people. But I feel like as a viewer, Succession really massages this masochistic, greedy part of our American brain that is so ingrained in us, and it feels like a guilty pleasure to tune in every week and to watch our favorite fictional billionaires fuck each other over and to personally root for the characters too. Even though if it were real life, their actions would trickle down and oppress millions, probably us. But I just honestly think that we as Americans aren't repulsed enough by greed personally, including myself, and how the pursuit of power can cause a person to be so cavalier about human life. Like, we just aren't repulsed enough by that. It's like we get to watch these characters and be a part of their world for an hour, and as viewers, we end up rationalizing a lot of their behaviors, no matter how morally corrupt. And I think that that is so interesting. And also, a byproduct of the great writing is the audience being able to see the humanity in even the worst characters. And we have these fictional characters who are dehumanizing to others in this fictional world, but it isn't hard to connect the dots to the actual wealthy elites that they emulate in the real world. And whether it be families who have had their wealth for generations or our favorite entertainers and politicians who are quote unquote new money. And the interesting thing about this show is that it aired during one of the most important and crucial time in American politics. And also, the pandemic put a lot of things into perspective as well for the average working class American. And also, this was a time where people were literally dying and everyone was stuck in the house and watching chaos ensue. And everything kind of reached a boiling point all at the same time, and people really started reevaluating how they view and interact with wealthy elites and politicians. And so I wonder why people, including myself, still haven't fully divested in the ways that we can. Of course, capitalism does force everyone to participate, but I wonder why more don't fully divest from the things that we don't necessarily need. And this could be things like Amazon or supporting certain entertainers. And in my opinion, I think that this can be attributed to hopelessness, convenience, and escapism. And I say this because I genuinely believe that the average everyday person is hopeless to some degree towards the systems that are in place, ever really changing, whether that be poverty, white supremacy, or climate change. And I think that that hopelessness translates into escapism, individualism, and making questionable decisions out of convenience. And also, a lot of people still aspire to appear to have the lives of the wealthy. And this can be seen in the trend of quiet luxury and wealth porn. We want to be a part of that world to a degree. If you still want something, it's hard to reject it, if that makes sense. So another thing I want to briefly dive into is just how zoomed in the show really is. And I think that this is also a reason why the viewers were so invested in the characters. Because we can't talk about Succession again without discussing how brilliant the writing is. And a part of that brilliance is humanizing terrible people. But they are still objectively bad people, and everyone there has no moral gray area. And the writers make that very clear multiple times throughout the show. And since the audience gets to see this very zoomed in version of the lives of billionaires, it's very easy to forget that their actions have a ripple effect that affects everyday people like us. And it's very easy to forget that we are not on the same team, and these fictional characters would do anything for power, even if that means disregarding our human rights. And this conversation is so important because it would be one thing if this was all fiction, but we do live in a world where alternative facts are a thing, and if you're rich, you can say and do whatever you want with no real consequences, especially if you're here in America. And the audience gets to see Logan's abuse of his children, and that abuse manifests in self-destructive behaviors. So we do feel bad for them because honestly, like, they're all pretty jacked up from Logan. Because to some degree, we see that they all just want their father's love and approval at the end of the day. But in episodes like Election Night or even Shiv's wedding, the audience gets a clear picture that the characters are completely void of any sense of morality. And the thing that was so interesting about our response to the Succession characters is that this show was airing during one of the only times in recent history where there has been a widespread critique of the super duper rich due to the wealth inequality gap only widening, and it still is. And right now we are damn near in a recession. We are, and nobody wants to admit it. I spent $17 at Chipotle the other day on a fucking soft Fritas bowl and some chips. And coupled with the absolute dumpster fire that is our political landscape, there were quite a few times, specifically in the final season, where things got a little bit too surreal, and I had to see the characters for who they really were. And there isn't a single person on this show with any redeeming qualities or moral gray area. I would say maybe Jessica, who was Kendall's assistant, but still, I don't know. And so now I want to dive into my complicated feelings for Siobhan, aka Shiv Roy. And throughout the show, I was rooting for Shiv solely because she was a woman and she was the only girl in this world of men. And she got a lot of hate and a lot of just blatant sexism because she was a woman and they weren't shy about it. And so I do want to explore my complicated feelings for Shiv because at different points I felt compelled to root for Shiv, while at other times I was absolutely repulsed by her actions. But I do support Shiv's rights and wrongs. But anyways, I always rooted for Shiv to some degree because as a viewer, we were introduced to her as someone who decided to pursue a career outside of the family business. So I was immediately intrigued because she seemed to have something that her brothers didn't. Like, it's, at least in the beginning, we were under the illusion that she did not live and die by Logan's opinion. And secondly, there were many moments where I genuinely felt for her because even though everybody got their fair share of shitty treatment, it always seems like Shiv got the brunt of it. And I think that was mostly just due to her being the only girl around. And I say this because any critiques or insults that were thrown her way were almost always gendered, and that being the baseline for why she was undermined. The HBO, before the 4th season aired, they used to upload these clips, and it was like the roast of like all the main characters, and it was just basically saying, it was basically like a compilation of all the insults or whatever each character got thrown at them. And all of the other ones were like funny, but then when Shiz was uploaded, it was like, damn, like, I don't know, like, they're really mean to Shiv. And I think it's still up, so y'all can go find it. And I also noticed that along with the Shiv supporters, there was also a strong response to people who were anti-Shiv. But you don't see such negative visceral reactions for any other character in the series. And obviously people hold Shiv to a higher standard simply because she is a woman. So when she does something terrible, no worse than anyone else on the show, she gets burned at the stake. And even when she pulls off something quote unquote good for the company, she isn't ever truly given a pat on the back by anybody. But you see how with the boys, they are at least given some type of acknowledgement. But in the words of Rhea, quote, Shiv isn't as smart as she thinks she is, end quote. We see Shiv shoot herself in the foot multiple times just when she is on the brink of greatness. But that is a Roy trait, and that's not exclusive to Shiv at all. So it was really interesting watching the finale and the final few minutes where she decides to change her mind and vote against Kendall, which resulted in Tom becoming the American CEO. And there was such a split reaction amongst Shiv's supporters in response to her decision. And some felt that her character had been assassinated, while others were somewhat at peace with her decision. And personally, for me, it was bittersweet because, in my opinion, I don't think that Shiv was ever going to get to the top spot. And we see how poorly equipped Kendall was. So it really was the best decision, even though I don't think she did it because she was like trying to be a good person and save her brothers. Because Kendall almost had it until he sat at the damn desk and put his feet up like he was just the king of the shit. And I think that she saw that and she didn't want that. But also in this world, power is the only thing that matters. So having Tom be the CEO was the closest Shiv was ever going to get to having the crown. And I only say this because I truly don't think that Shiv would have been able to pull off something clever enough where she would have ended up as CEO, because she would have had to outsmart everyone. Because there's no way in hell, like we see throughout the series, especially in the final seasons, how Roman and Kendall count her out and exclude her multiple times. So they were never going to be on board and like vote for Shiv to be the CEO. But then again, Shiv isn't as smart as she thinks she is. So there were many times when she overplayed her hand or just self-sabotaged at the last minute. And it was really hard watching her and Tom basically switch places. And her being so close to the thing that she always wanted, but being unable to fully grasp it. And now you're forever tied to a person who will be a constant reminder. Whereas with Roman and Kendall, I mean, who knows what state of mind Kendall is in, because I'm sure that just ruined his life that he isn't the king of the company or whatever. But at least they're free. Where Shiv is still kind of has a one foot in that world, and now she's tied to Tom, and now she has this kid on the way. So now she's just simply a wife in that world. But also, in my opinion, Tom is smarter than all of them combined. So it made sense that he was a dark horse all along. But in my opinion, it's only a matter of time before Tom is fully consumed by greed. But as a person, Shiv was still deplorable, but she's no worse than everyone else. And Kendall still kind of sort of killed that waiter. So it's a lot worse people on that show than Shiv. But she did really piss me off when she talked to the survivor. That was fucked up. So now I want to explore if money changes people or does it enhance who they already are. Because in Succession, we see the people who were just born into wealth and their transformation when they are in the pursuit of power. But then we also see people who have worked their way up the corporate ladder and their transformations as well. And that was pretty interesting watching as a viewer. So earlier I talked about how when people are usually discussing the wealthy elites, they usually say something along the lines of, quote, if I had X amount of money, I hope I'll be a better person than so-and-so. And that makes me wonder if the idea that money doesn't change people, it only enhances who they are, is accurate. And I'm saying this because time and time again, we see normal everyday people become wealthy, and for whatever reason, they are just assholes. And they have very questionable business practices. And I'm not talking about being broke to having $1 million. If you switch up and start treating people like shit, then that's just a character flaw. I'm talking about unimaginable wealth, like billions. And whether you're born into it or you've acquired it however way, we get people like Kanye West, Rihanna, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos, who have all been accused of unethical business practices, but were they always not the best people, but they just now have more access to be shittier people? Or did their wealth change them? I wonder. And honestly, right now, I'm kind of torn, so we're just going to work our way through this. And personally, I would attribute this to money, because even if it isn't changing the individual who acquired the wealth, it will change everyone around them. And so if you have enough money, most of the people around you can possibly, not always, but sometimes and a lot of times, they end up turning into yes men, which could influence the individual's decisions. And this is just a possibility. So my question is, are humans by nature barbaric and greedy, or do people actually change when they acquire wealth or power? And I'm posing this question because if it's in our nature, then it can be changed. And I feel like what keeps people in check to some degree is the fact that we have consequences for our actions. And then you add in things like race, socioeconomic status, and gender, etc. Whereas the wealthy elites, there isn't really any real accountability. And some may even argue that when you acquire an exuberant amount of wealth, your wealth supersedes any other identity. And I do want to make it clear that I'm not saying hypothetically if you're a part of a marginalized group, then you're innately uncivilized, because I don't believe that, and I'm not a eugenicist. But I do wonder if after you reach a certain level of wealth, is it even possible to not be a corrupt person? Like, is there something innate in humans to feel compelled to keep unfair societal structures in place when you're the only one benefiting from them, especially to that degree? And I'm posing this question because it would be one thing if everybody had their basic needs met, but some people just lived in normal houses and other people lived in mansions. But it is a completely different story where there are billionaires and corrupt politicians at the top of the pyramid, and then there are everyday working people and can't even get a livable wage, let alone health insurance. But then when you think about it, these are all just side effects of white supremacy. So also, I don't think it's inevitable for society to be what it is, because a very sensible solution would be to put a cap on how much money one could acquire. Or we could just have a better system where everyone's needs are met, but everyone would have to want that, and obviously that's not the case. There are, I'm sure, even people who aren't politicians or like in the top 1%, there are people who don't care about poor people or homeless people, or people who just have that bootstrap mentality when sometimes it's just not that simple. So, yeah. And also, the only time there are ever any real consequences and punishment when a wealthy person does something heinous is usually when they do something to another wealthy person, or if it's some kind of undeniable expose, like Jeffrey Epstein or something. Think of somebody like Elizabeth Holmes, the lady Theranos. I'm not sure how you say it. She's in jail right now. I think she's serving like an 11-year sentence. She kept on trying to get pregnant, but whatever. Y'all know who I'm talking about. I'm going to put her picture up there. But she is a terrible individual because she defrauded billions of dollars, and she caused the emotional distress of individuals who used the Edison machine and got inaccurate results. But she was only convicted for defrauding billionaires, not for the pain she caused to normal people. She was charged with that, but she was only convicted for defrauding billionaires. And there are certain ways I don't behave as a Black queer woman because my identity informs my decisions and how the world interacts with me. And I would like to think that even if all those barriers were removed, I would still be a good, decent human being, and I believe I would. But there's nothing inherently evil about money, but there is something evil about money equating to power and how it's used as a vehicle for humans to be evil. Sometimes I just wonder if there's something about having so much wealth and power that prevents a person from seeing others as real people with lives and not just pieces in a game of Monopoly. And we see this time and time again in the real world and in the fictional world of Succession. Just look at Tom and Greg again, or the Disgusting Brothers in the later seasons. Or right now there's a genocide being committed by the Israeli government against the people of Palestine, while the most powerful politicians in the world are either being neutral or are full on supporting the government of Israel, despite the disapproval being expressed by the majority of people who fall outside the 1%. And so what history has shown us is that the people in power think that your voice and humanity only really matter if you're wealthy, white, or both. And of course, this can all be contributed to being socialized in a greedy, capitalistic, racist society like America. And this isn't a revolutionary thought. Everything I say could be summed up as the byproduct of white supremacy. So I'm not sure if it's human nature or just the machine of whiteness. And also, one could argue that greed and corruption isn't a part of human nature due to the importance of community and how a lot of civilizations pre-colonialism focused on more social and community-centered structures. But the norm is greed and capitalism because we've all been tainted by colonizers, which can't be blamed on the entire human race, when there's a specific region who invaded and dominated other continents and forced that way of life. And that would have more to do with us being socialized to be cogs in a machine or at the top of a capitalistic society and less to do with human nature. But I do want to revisit this conversation at another time though, because there's still so much that I want to say, but I haven't been able to fully and concisely put my thoughts into words in reference to if money actually changes people. So I do need to marinate on this a bit more, but I will revisit this topic eventually. But to end this video, I don't want to only finger point and say the rich people are bad, because honestly that feels kind of redundant at this point. And the urge to be careless and harmful to people who you perceive as lower than you doesn't only apply to people with wealth. We have all done or have been on the receiving end of poor treatment due to a perception of superiority. And whether that be a difference of social status due to economics, race, beauty, or intelligence, people can be cruel, and we all have the capacity to varying degrees. And lastly, we should all treat others with a level of respect and consideration outside of what they can do for us. And I genuinely think we all as individuals have the capability to change the world. In my opinion, that's just what I think. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in the cycle of survival and despair. That sometimes we forget the power that we have as individuals that is inside of all of us. So yeah, everything that we have and all the structures that we have in place, good and bad, all started with an idea. So be the change you want to see in the world. And yeah, that is it for today's video. I feel like that was an abrupt ending, but I need to chew on this topic a bit more, but I did just want to get this out. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys feel safe and seen wherever you are, and I hope you guys are finding joy and fulfillment on your journey of self-expression. Until next time.